An elderly woman, a note, and a secret that will change a life. Stay until the end to reveal the mystery behind this unexpected encounter. This young black man had had a strenuous day at work, but when he noticed an elderly woman entering the crowded bus, he quickly offered her his seat without giving it much thought. However, she handed him a shocking note that changed his life. 23-year-old Marcus arrived at the bus stop after a hard day of work, juggling between being a machine operator and a cleaner in a production factory. He saw the bus and jumped right on it. He was lucky to spot a free seat since buses were always crowded in the afternoon. He was exhausted. His whole body ached, and his toxic boss had unloaded his frustration and anger on him. As usual, he had been up since 5 a.m. and had hardly had time to sit down. As he settled into his seat, no one looked at him or paid him any attention. Everyone was focused on their phones or their own issues. Marcus leaned back and began to think. He knew he couldn't keep up with such labor for long. It would only burn him out. As he was deep in thought, the bus slowed down to pick up a passenger, and an elderly woman stepped on. She looked so frail, and her steps were unsteady. She moved slowly from the door into the bus, and when she saw all the seats were taken, she leaned her body against the window pane. She was clearly uncomfortable, but she had no other choice. No one would be kind enough to offer her a seat. After all, in this city, everyone only looks out for themselves. She just wished the bus would be faster so she could reach her destination quickly. As the bus moved, the old woman winced as her waist and knees began aching. Marcus looked up and noticed the old woman's struggle. He felt immediate compassion for her and called out. "Hello, ma'am," he said kindly. "You can take my seat." The elderly woman was shocked at first. She never believed anyone in this city could be so kind and considerate. She smiled at him and limped slowly to the seat. Marcus helped her sit down while he stood for the rest of the journey. 3 minutes later, Marcus reached his bus stop and asked the driver to slow down. As he got off the bus, the elderly woman's frail hands grabbed his jacket. He turned in surprise and then felt her fingers slip into his pocket. She put a note in his pocket, and there was no time to wonder what the note was about as the other passengers were already pushing him. Marcus stepped off the bus, and it immediately sped away. It all felt surreal. Why would she put a note in his pocket? Maybe it was a thank you note, he thought. Marcus put his hand in his pocket and pulled out the note. What he saw scribbled on the note made his mouth drop open. Written on one side of the note was a street address, and on the other side were 5 numbers written like a code. Together it read, 5 Queen Street, code 88687. This certainly confused Marcus. He tried to understand, but it didn't make sense. What was this? After thinking for a while, he folded the paper, put it in his pocket, and headed home. He really needed his rest more than anything else. Once home, Marcus took a quick bath and tried to rest, but as hard as he tried, he couldn't bring himself to sleep. He kept thinking about the elderly woman and the note. It was clearly an address, but could it be a trap? Somehow, he couldn't sleep that night. He tossed and turned in bed, thinking about what to do. The next day, Marcus boarded the bus with the hope of seeing the elderly woman and asking her about the note, but there was no sign of her that morning. He hoped to see her in the evening after work, but still, she was nowhere to be found. Marcus was disappointed, and his confusion deepened as he wondered what message she was trying to convey. He couldn't get the note off his mind and spent the next 2 days deeply thinking about it. His curiosity reached its peak, so he made a mental note to visit the address on his day off. His Fridays were always off, and he used them to do his laundry, but that Friday, Marcus decided to visit the address and see for himself. He just hoped he wasn't endangering his life by walking into a trap. He boarded the same bus where he met the elderly woman and headed to the address. It took 35 minutes before the bus reached the destination. As soon as Marcus got down from the bus, he couldn't find any house around the area. Well, there was a house, but it was a large, intimidating estate surrounded by gardens and trees. The entire vicinity was calm and felt so natural. Marcus looked around, studying the environment for any signs of danger. When he was satisfied that he was safe, he headed towards the large gate. He knocked on it, but there was no response. It made sense because there was no gatepost, and the house was too far for anyone to hear him knocking and come to open it. Marcus looked at the gate and noticed the panel by the central lock. When he opened it, he saw a small monitor with a keypad. It needed a security code. Marcus wondered what it could be until it hit him. This security code was the 5-digit number from the note. Marcus pulled out the note and typed in the code. He was immediately granted access. As the gate opened, he stepped into the large compound and saw that there was a huge mansion at the end. He walked towards it, hoping to get to the bottom of the mystery. When he reached the front door, he turned the knob and pushed it open. As he stepped into the large living room, he saw something that shook him to his core. There sat the very same elderly woman he met on the bus. She was sitting on a sofa with a bright smile on her face. From the looks of things, it was obvious she had been expecting him. She seemed very glad that he had shown up. Marcus had many questions to ask her. The woman introduced herself as Vivian. Marcus was eager to know why she had brought him there. First, Vivian thanked Marcus for helping her on the bus. She had gone for a medical checkup that day and couldn't get a cab, which is why she opted for the public bus. The elderly woman offered Marcus a drink, but he wasn't interested. He wanted to know why she had invited him to her house. Vivian cleared her throat while maintaining an air of suspense. Marcus, on the other hand, felt quite uneasy. He wished she would just open up. Finally, Vivian took a deep breath and said the words, "I need a caretaker. I am sick, and at my age, I can hardly do anything around the house. My health is worsening daily, so I need someone to take care of me." At almost 70 years old, it is hard to navigate such a big house. To show she was serious, she disclosed the pay. Marcus was shocked. The pay was 6 times that of his former job. That was a dream come true. All of a sudden, Marcus felt his worries fade away. He immediately accepted the job offer, and Vivian was glad. In the past 4 years, she had employed over 7 caretakers. Most of them stole from her, while some grew tired of the job and left. But she knew she could trust Marcus, who had proved to be a compassionate soul. Marcus only requested a few days to take care of some personal matters before starting work. Vivian agreed and bid him farewell. Marcus stepped out of the house with mixed feelings. He thought of his new job and the challenges that would come with it. He wondered why an elderly woman would choose to live alone in such a big house. At the same time, Vivian was a cheerful and kind woman, and he was sure he would enjoy the job. Marcus showed up at the factory and submitted his resignation letter. His boss was shocked by his decision, but when he saw Marcus's mind was made up, he offered to double his pay. For someone who had belittled and yelled at Marcus for the last few years, this was unexpected. Marcus was surprised. It turned out his boss took his anger out on him because he knew Marcus needed the job and wouldn't quit. But he also knew that Marcus was a very hard worker and would be difficult to replace. Marcus, however, had already made up his mind and politely declined. 2 days later, Marcus started working at Vivian's house. The job wasn't exhausting. All he had to do was make Vivian's breakfast and ensure she took her medication. He also prepared her bath water, did the laundry, and cleaned around the house. After working for the day, he would grab a drink and watch his favorite show on television. By then, Vivian would be asleep for hours. When she woke up, they would often sit down and talk. Vivian was a storyteller, and she entertained Marcus with tales from the past. Marcus loved to listen to her because of her profound wisdom. They would speak for hours, and then he would make her dinner. He ensured that everything was in order before he decided he was done for the day. Marcus grew a strong emotional attachment to Vivian, and her home became like his second home. He began to view taking care of Vivian not as a job, but as a responsibility. Vivian loved Scotch eggs, and he would make them every morning for her. He did everything else she needed, never complained, and was always polite and kind. As the days passed, Vivian became weaker. She could barely move 10 steps, and her breathing quickened so much that it seemed like her heart would fail. Marcus was always there by her side to help her. He would read newspapers to her, and they watched some operas on television. One early morning, As he stepped into the living room with a couple of pastries he had bought as a surprise for Vivian, he saw something shocking. Vivian was struggling to breathe, and it was a very scary sight. In deep panic, he grabbed the phone and called emergency services. 15 minutes later, an ambulance arrived, and they rushed Vivian to the hospital. She was placed on 4 fluids, and the doctors recommended some medications for her. Marcus was glad that he had come earlier that morning. It was a stroke of luck. He was fidgeting as he stood by Vivian's side, holding her hand and praying for her survival. 20 minutes later, Vivian woke up. She looked up at Marcus and smiled, thanking him for being there for her. Marcus just said he was doing his job, but he knew it was more than that. Vivian was discharged that evening, and they took a cab home. Once they arrived, Marcus prepared scrambled eggs and served them to her. When she was done with her meal, he led her to her room, washed her, and tucked her into her thick duvet. It was late, and Vivian bid him goodnight, but Marcus had no plans of leaving. The morning incident still traumatized him because he knew that if he had come just 20 minutes later, Vivian would have passed on. So, he didn't want to leave anything to chance any longer. There were 3 spare bedrooms, and he planned to sleep in one of them. Vivian thanked him again for everything but reminded him that it was late and he needed to go back home. However, Marcus insisted that he would sleep over, so he bid her goodnight and headed to one of the bedrooms. Little did he know the consequences of this choice. A few minutes after midnight, Marcus was awakened by a strange sound. He got up and checked on Vivian, but the old lady was sleeping soundly. Feeling satisfied, Marcus headed back to his room, but to his surprise, he heard the sound again. This time, it sounded like someone was picking a keyhole, but Marcus dismissed the thought. The fence was high enough to deter intruders, and the gate was locked with a password, meaning it wasn't easy to break in. Marcus wasn't worried, so he laid back on the bed and dozed off. A few minutes later, Marcus was awakened by a sharp scream. He jumped out of bed and ran into Vivian's room. There he saw a truly shocking scene. There was a masked man with a gun pointed at Vivian, demanding her money and jewelry. Marcus's first thought was that Vivian was too fragile to deal with this kind of trauma, so he quickly sprang into action. As someone who had grown up doing monotonous, laborious jobs, his reflexes were sharp and precise. Marcus quickly disarmed the intruder, and the weapon fell to the ground. The intruder was extremely shocked at Marcus's presence, as he knew the old woman stayed alone. He never even saw Marcus until he kicked the weapon out of his hand. He knew he needed to beat Marcus to escape. They engaged in a scuffle, and Marcus didn't give the intruder any breathing space. Marcus was a better fighter and knocked the intruder to the floor, but the man wasn't ready to give up. As Vivian dialed 911, the intruder tried to make good on his escape. He pulled out a small knife, and before Marcus could react, he drove the blade into Marcus's stomach and jumped out through the window. The knife was small, but Marcus was hurt. He needed urgent medical care, or the situation could escalate. When emergency services arrived, Marcus had to be taken to the hospital. Throughout his hospital stay, Vivian sat by his bedside, displaying unwavering loyalty. If Marcus could take a knife for her, it meant he would do anything for her. The doctors bandaged his wounds and took care of him until he recovered. When he was discharged, Vivian asked him to rest at his home for a few days before resuming work, but Marcus wouldn't listen. He couldn't afford to leave her by herself. What if something even worse happened to her? Marcus resumed work and continued taking care of Vivian. They had many conversations, and Vivian learned about Marcus's mother. Marcus's father had passed away, and he had just a mom and a little sister who lived in another city. His mother had been diagnosed with leukemia and needed a bone marrow transplant. They had been saving money for it, but it wasn't enough. When Vivian heard this, she assured him that everything would be fine. He was young and had a promising future, so he shouldn't worry. In the following month, Vivian's health deteriorated to the point that she wasn't even responding to medications anymore. Marcus called the ambulance, and Vivian was admitted to the hospital. The doctors tried everything they could, but her cells kept dying. Even when the doctors considered the case hopeless, Marcus didn't give up. He was a staunch believer in miracles. He couldn't afford to lose Vivian, as they had built an unbreakable bond. He begged her to fight for her life, holding her hands and urging her to stay strong. As Vivian lay on the hospital bed, too weak to move her body, she reflected on her life with deep gratitude. Marcus was one of the best people to have entered her life in recent years, and she was glad that the universe had given her this gift. During her last moments, as dusk approached, she once again told Marcus to go home, but he refused. Vivian wanted him to return to his own mother, but Marcus did not budge. He told her that his mom would be fine, but right now, he needed to keep watch over her. Marcus stayed with Vivian all night, listening to her voice, which by now was barely above a whisper. She kept thanking Marcus for everything until her voice fell silent a few hours before dawn. At that same time, the monitor stopped beeping. Marcus screamed, unwilling to believe what was happening. When the doctor stepped in, Marcus begged him to resuscitate Vivian, but the doctor merely confirmed her passing at 4:20 a.m. as her body was being prepared for burial. Marcus couldn't believe what had happened. He fell into a state of shock, remaining still for a few moments. His benefactor had died. Worse yet, his friend had died. He had come to love Vivian so much that her passing hit him like a ton of bricks. She was like the grandmother he never had. His heartbeat increased and he almost suffered a heart attack. Tears started flowing from his eyes as he trembled with grief. He cried so hard that his eyes became sore, and he lost his voice. He returned home and couldn't sleep, wishing that life weren't so cruel. It was very hard to move on, but he had to. He spent over 3 days indoors, and his mother, who had heard the news, came to see him to comfort her son. A week later, Vivian was buried in a cemetery. Marcus stared at the tombstone one last time. "You will always be in my heart," Marcus said softly. He returned home and began making plans to find a new job. A few weeks later, he heard a knock on his door. 3 men were standing outside his house, dressed in expensive suits. Marcus was confused and slightly wary. One of them stepped forward and introduced himself as Vivian's attorney. He then said the most shocking thing that Marcus had ever heard. Vivian had willed all her estates and business investments to Marcus. Marcus was in deep shock and dismissed it as a joke. The attorney handed him a document, and Marcus flipped through the pages. As he did, his mouth hung open in disbelief. Vivian had been a millionaire with shares in top companies. She had single-handedly grown her business to immense wealth when she was just 30 years old. She had started buying estates, channeled all her energy into her businesses, and had never married. When she turned 40, she established a foundation for children and had also set up a few charity homes. A few weeks ago, after Marcus saved her life from the intruder, she had informed her attorney to pass her wealth down to Marcus after her death. When she passed away, Marcus suddenly found himself a millionaire. Marcus was touched and honored to be blessed by Vivian just because he had taken care of her. Now that Marcus was a millionaire, he could afford his mother's surgery. Truly, Marcus wouldn't have received such a massive reward if he hadn't offered his seat to the elderly lady on that bus just a few months ago. His kindness and compassion had earned him a lifetime of riches. Have you ever given up your seat for someone in need? Share your stories in the comments. We hope you enjoyed the story. Turn on your notification button to enjoy more videos. If this video has helped you connect more with yourself and inspired you on your path of growth, take action and subscribe to the Vidas Inspiración channel to discover more stories that will fill you with motivation and hope. I'd love to hear your thoughts, so leave a comment telling me how this story has impacted your life or what reflections it has left you with. And if you believe that this message could inspire someone you know, share it with your friends so they too can find inspiration and purpose in their lives.